Ittai, so how about we start with the current challenges with the data access in healthcare and how federated learning can help solve these challenges?
Sure. So currently, a combination of regulation, lack of a common platform for compute, and general lack of trust in the market make collaborations in healthcare data much slower and often don't really hit the ground. The reason for that is that, or at least one of the reasons, is because today the state of the art is reliant on data sharing or data pooling from different sources, and that model has a lot of limitations, and those limitations are becoming even more apparent the more where HIPAA evolves into new restrictions, more countries adopt GDPR provisions, and the general feeling of people is that data can be used against them, data can be used to re-identify people, and data can be used without people having any control over the usage of their data. And that could be patients not having control over the data, that can be hospitals not having the ways to protect their patient data privacy.
And that basically leads to organizations being closed to collaboration with between each other to build better systems using the aggregated data that they have. And instead, they have to work within their data that they have access to, and then they know that it's safe to train on. Is that correct? And how the federated learning can help there?
I think you're touching on one opportunity for improving healthcare delivery by creating learning systems. Today, the platform to have these learning systems built and improve over time doesn't really exist. And it's usually left for third-party vendors to make leverage of that data. Typically, the kind of incentives that a vendor has versus a provider has are not the same. If I'm, for example, a startup developing a clinical diagnostic tool, I'm going to use the absolute lowest amount of evidence as I can, which makes often sense if you're a startup and you're scrapping for cash. And today it often works with kind of like what the FDA defines as the minimal barrier in order to get a product out to market. But it doesn't always align with what providers would like to see. And so both there's a limitation on what kind of use cases are even being pursued, which is typically something that I could really build a product around and market that product in short order, and also striving to being more inclusive of more diverse patient data from more hospitals, from more geographies, from more devices, and anything that could improve the diagnostic and improve decision support tools coming out of different academic and non-academic institutions.
And if I'm starting a company and I'm trying to leverage this data, how would I go about getting the access to this data today without federated learning?
That's a great question. So we've seen all sorts of models. Some folks will just install a server behind the hospital's firewall at the hospital's data center and kind of like get the VPN access to that, which is, it's like not a lot of control from the hospital side, but on the other hand, the data does stay local, even with, some maybe some level of compromise for security. Some just take anonymized data from the hospital and put it in their development environment, which is often cloud-based. That's another way to go at it. Some places would actually do a combination of these two or work with each hospital kind of like the way the hospital wants to. The problem is often that the hospital itself, like the core mission of the hospital is not to create data sharing projects, but rather to provide patient care and to support health IT in production that's needed for patient care delivery. So it often becomes kind of a nuisance where you need to sort out an IT team to suddenly support other vendor IT just to do these collaborations. It often means that the bar is fairly high. Like if I'm a hospital and my upside for doing this collaboration is actually fairly small, it's hard for me to find economic sense in doing that. There's also hospitals that have kind of taken the approach of working with data middlemen and licensing their data out via middlemen, which is in some cases, like a completely acceptable approach. It is getting harder since both the regulation is tightening up in many countries around what you're allowed to share, and also because the actual field of AI is progressing. And so if until recently it was enough to work on data from an X-ray machine or a CT or an MRI, now you suddenly need to get more labels, more data sources, use EMR data, use genetic data, use pathology data, use patient monitor data, etc. And you kind of pretty quickly get to the point where these middlemen don't necessarily have the tools in order to ensure data privacy is maintained on one hand, and there's been a myriad of publications and examples of how you can re-identify patient data, even if the data is de-identified, in the case where you have a sufficient number of data sources that you can triangulate between. So that's like a significant limitation. And also it restricts the amount of providers who actually want and can collaborate on these kind of things. So you end up using more narrow data than you would have otherwise.
So your approach is different. You're going after federated learning to solve this issue and to unlock this data for the organizations that are trying to build smart systems on top of it.
Yeah, so our approach goes towards leaving the data where it is. We put edge devices in the hospital's data center. In each hospital's data center, sometimes it can be in more than one area of the hospital itself, depends on kind of how the organization is structured. And we run all the kind of compute processes that you typically do in order to process data and create predictive models and to test and deploy them, with the nuance that all of that happens on the edge, meaning where the data sits instead of moving the data to a cloud environment. And so that's the novelty of the approach. Realistically, because of the way our footprint is, we had to become a multi-cloud hybrid solution. So we have some installs on Amazon, some installs on GCP, some installs on Azure, and some installs on bare metal servers in hospitals or different virtualized systems at hospitals. It enables the hospital to both have a platform for research and internal development, so what you kind of define as the learning system, that greatly reduces the barriers towards scaling out innovation from the hospital into a larger health system, and gaining what's often is, what prevents a lot of great ideas from going to market, which is achieving external validity. So like both market validity, meaning other people want to also use my tool and it's useful for other hospitals, but also the actual data validation, meaning this algorithm works on other data, not just my data. So that's part of that value. And there's a lot of health systems that actually want to collaborate more efficiently with vendors and different startups. And this allows them to do these collaborations without going through the hurdles that are driven by data sharing.
So this is your pitch to the hospitals and universities. We will come to you. We will set up our system on the edge in your data centers or in your private cloud. And then you can offer it to partner organizations to do projects using that data.
Indeed, you become part of a bigger network in which all the needs to share data in order to collaborate are alleviated. You can collaborate on data without sharing data. That, I'd say, is, in short, our pitch to hospitals.
And from the point of view of a user of the data, the startup that we talked about who is interested in developing a new product based on that data, how does the workflow look for them?
So it helps you maintain your regular workflow because the system itself is highly versatile and flexible. You can continue working as you were. You can both bring in your tooling and deploy your own tools on the edge compute orchestrator, and you can control the system via an API from your own development environment. So it really requires you to make a minimal level of adjustments in the way you would work, and helps you unleash all the power of the tools and the different applications that you've already developed, just in a way that's remote.
Yeah, this sounds like a very powerful way and very powerful approach for the organizations that are interested in building on top of data. They don't need to change anything and can just work as usual, but have this access to the data. What kind of specifics they need to take into account when working through Rhino Health Platform? Is it about the fact that the data is always invisible to them, so they cannot maybe do some operations with the data that they would otherwise done? What are those things?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the first questions we got from different startups said, well, one of the big companies today in the AI field says, but my data scientists, when they start working on a new project, they want to massage the data, play with the data, feel the data. This is all kind of like putting like a mask between us and the data. And, that won't work out for us. And so one of the things we figured out is that data doesn't always have to be hidden. It doesn't have to be a black box. But the hospitals, or in general the data custodians, need to be convinced that nobody's going to copy their data out. Meaning you can provide like a controlled viewing of the data, but you're not allowed to take it out. So we created a whole feature called Secure Access, which allows you to employ a zero footprint viewer in order to see tabular and unstructured data using an imaging viewer or tabular viewer. And that can help you understand kind of like a glimpse of the data. You can allow that only on demand with approval of a data custodian. You can allow that only on specific data elements or specific fields of the data. So you kind of like keep the sensitive parts unviewed, and maybe you can run an algorithm on them, but you can't actually see them in an unrestricted way. While you can also allow a certain amount of anonymized data to be viewed by the developer, which is kind of like how a typical data science project would look like. And it's also one of the advantages of our system over the kind of homomorphic encryption and the complete kind of like blind learning approaches, which really work only if the data is extremely tidy and standardized, which is really not how healthcare data typically is.
That's definitely not the case with the healthcare data and most of the real world data out there. How do they go about the situations when they need to combine data from several institutions, from multiple hospitals, and maybe even universities? How to make sure that that data can be combined?
Yeah, great question. So the Rhino Health Platform has a flexible data schema system, which basically means I can define for each one of these institutions a data schema, then validate data that it fits that schema, and then you can do the whole data processing and ahead of the model and on the platform itself, and convert that into a global schema, kind of like a common data model for all the data. And you can keep a host of reusable ETL tools that you can use in order to build and replenish these pipelines between different institutions. And so it allows you to de facto harmonize data on the platform while maintaining the flexibility of ingesting data from different sources, which the data may be structured in a different way.
That's really helpful. So flexible schema and then standardizing it to one view or one schema that is universal for all those data sources from different places. And Now, back to the data quality question. Did I get you right that the data quality is still resides with the hospitals and their teams themselves? So developer can point to, say, issues with the data, and then the team at hospital is supposed to clean it up. What's the best practice there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we give the tools to identify the data quality and also to improve the data quality. So you can run an imputation tool, or you can run any type of standardization or normalization or manual annotation or manual labeling on the data. So you're not restricted to relying on the hospital's staff in order to improve the quality of the data. And you can actually completely virtualize the data in that regard. So you can bring in like an annotator from Japan to annotate data in Brazil without any data being persisted outside the hospital's firewall. So that kind of alleviates one of the bigger operational challenges in building distributed collaborations.
It does. Yeah, this is a very important piece of the whole picture. Let's talk about the implementation of Rhino Health platforms. You have multiple cases where it was used in real world. So talk about a few of them.
Sure. So one of our early projects was to take the exam model that we published on in Nature Medicine in September 2021 and retrain and validate it on different hospitals in the Rhino network. And we did that at Beth Israel and in Cambridge in the UK. Then later on, we took a brain aneurysm detector model that was created in Harvard Medical School and the Camco Center, and then tested and validated it in 7 hospitals worldwide, including hospitals from Korea, Taiwan, Brazil, different US hospitals, UK, and Israel. We are currently supporting multiple collaborations, including the EDRN's early detection effort for the pancreatic cancer detection, different collaborations for detecting rare diseases of childhood at the Children's National Hospital, using natural language processing as part of diagnostic pathways with additional US hospitals, including Dana-Farber and others, and quite a few others. We're also working with some large professional societies in order to create distributed registries that can process data and receive data in a prospective way from hospitals. So that really allows you close to real-time access to new data without needing to share data. And that's like a really big step change there. Is including also working with some companies that process real-world data in order to identify patients for clinical trials and do population and outcome studies. And we have some more things in the pipeline with pharma companies looking to leverage our capabilities for identification, validation, and deployment of biomarkers for also similar purposes.
When you work with on all those projects, what are the common pitfalls or common issues you keep running into? And do you expect everyone who would deploy federated learning will run into?
So first of all, because we are one of the few companies that have actually done federated learning in the wild, meaning in actual hospital data centers with collaborators from different countries, different continents, different languages, etc., we smoothened out by our experience a lot of the pitfalls and a lot of the wrinkles that we would experience. So that was already a great first step towards reaching our vision. When we expanded our work, we discovered that, first of all, a lot of different technology has already been built for AI, and we need to have a maximal level of flexibility. And that required us to develop new features, like, for example, creating ad hoc compute environments where you can run a container, you can continue to control the container while it was being run. And so you can basically take whatever kind of software you have, containerize it, and run it on the edge, even if it has a graphic user interface, which is something that I think was pretty much a novelty. It required us to have more complicated user permissions and more roles in the projects, like adding more personas and what each person can't do, etc., in order to meet kind of like really very different needs of customers in different states and in different use cases. And lastly, we discovered that there's still some amount of upskilling that needs to be done in order to fully leverage the system, including working with Docker containers and kind of like different scalable compute solutions that we had to both create more examples and help our customers do, as well as creating more tooling and convenience functions in order to help the whole process of adapting to the Rhino distributed environment more easy.
Right. Speaking about scaling, you need to train the systems on the edge in the customer environment, and the training can be compute hungry. So how do you deal with the compute intensiveness of training and the extra resources that might be needed to pull it off?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as part of our resource management, we created all sorts of ways to handle long-standing processes and to have ability of stopping some of the processes if they're kind of slowing down the whole. And so that gives you more flexibility in cases you have a server that drops off during the training or anything kind of like connectivity going down and such. There's other ways like doing on-demand cloud scaling and stuff like that we're still figuring it out. And also one of the ways we got forward is in providing VPCs to different collaborating institutions. So you don't have to rely on necessarily your bare metal infrastructure, but you can use a VPC that you can control and has the Rhino client running there. There are more things to do that, and that's definitely, something that slows down AI development today. On the other hand, we also see a lot of examples where institutions have invested in buying expensive GPU servers and are now reluctant to move all their data outside to a third party's cloud environment, saying, we've already made all these investments. Why can't we leverage the compute we already have? So I think that's a flip side to your point there. Like in many cases, we actually enable more efficient usage of existing compute resources. And I think there's even been like a year or two before paper coming out of Cambridge showing that Federated Learning could help fight global warming by reducing the need for creating more and more GPU farms and having better leverage of existing compute resources.
Better utilization of the computer resources that those hospitals already have. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but it makes perfect sense. And you also talk about connecting 50%, about half of the data in Israel. So can you talk about that part? How do you define 50%, first of all, and where the data resides?
So that's a rough estimate, but I can highlight a few of our key collaborations in Israel, both with the Maccabi Health Services Research Institute, the KSM Institute, which is one of the biggest players in AI and large population data studies in Israel. Another one is the Asuta Medical Centers, one of the biggest private hospital network in Israel. Another one is MAR Diagnostic Centers, which is a big private imaging center chain, and several other key players who are currently being onboarded, but we'll be able to announce in the upcoming 2 months.
And as far as I understand, the end game is to get all the sources of healthcare data connected to Rhino Health Platform in Israel and elsewhere.
I mean, most of our activity today is we have North American presence, Latin American presence, and the Asia Pacific presence. We also have a fairly big presence in Israel, but I don't think that's actually the majority of our footprint. We have a UK presence, which we'd like to expand. And also in general, have more activity in the EU, especially as our method is uniquely positioned in order to handle limitations of data processing driven by GDPR. But I'd say, you kind of, the way you say it makes it sound a bit like Rhino ultimately links your data and kind of like does stuff with your data. And that's not really what we do. What we do is liberate your data for your users. So we create a network where new collaborations can be set up within minutes, not years, and that is independent of Rhino. Meaning we really create like a platform, but it's up to the users to build and deploy the tools we want.
Yeah, the point I was driving at was that it makes perfect sense to have one platform that connects all data sources out there, because that's how you can leverage the most of the platform. So this is as clear a network effect as one can find in any product, where the whole industry will benefit from having one company offering one solution to everyone. So reaching 100% penetration is only natural for this type of product. How is your system, how is Rhino Health different from what else is available in the market?
So first of all, we are a platform as a service. We don't endeavor to be a marketplace or to monetize your data for you. And that's kind of just how we built the company and the place we'd like to play in the value chain. And so you don't have to become a business partner of Rhino in order to use Rhino. And I think that's kind of a difference. We do sometimes provide some level of professional services on customer demand, but that's not the core of our business. And so the platform is really a self-serve tool for you to build on. And I'd say that in addition to that, we have brought the collective experience from building distributed compute and from running distributed compute research that I think is unparalleled in the market. And we continue to collaborate with some of our good collaborators from companies like NVIDIA in continuing to develop the system, develop the framework, etc. And I think that's kind of both been a really awesome point of continuity from the exam study and up to date. And has also helped us really focus on building the parts of the platform that we thought were the most novel and needed, rather than kind of like build another federated learning framework, of which there are quite a bit of these already available in the market.
Your approach is to take existing parts, add your pieces, and make it practically usable at scale by the organizations in the real world.
I'd say that there is a lot of novel IP in the system, but if it exists, then we prefer using it rather than reinventing the wheel. And when we started building our platform, there already was quite a few federated learning frameworks already available, most of them open sourced. And so we didn't try to build the Rhino FL framework, but rather make Rhino into the platform that would give the optimal support for federated learning and edge compute.
And that makes perfect sense. Let's now talk a little bit about the origins of the company. So how did you started the company? What became the trigger?
Yeah, so the origin story of Rhino actually starts from 2020. So in my previous role, I was leading development and deployment of AI in a big healthcare network. And one of the models that I collaborated on developing was an algorithm to predict outcomes in COVID patients. I really wanted to bring that algorithm out to other institutions, but we were facing the challenge of if we really productized it and went to the FDA and got an emergency use authorization or 510K clearance, it would have taken like a really long time and the pandemic would be over by then. And if we just containerized and sent it to people, we wouldn't know how to deploy it and also wouldn't trust the algorithm because their data wasn't used to train it. And, COVID was kind of an area where a lot of people didn't know a lot of things. And there was a gap in science and a gap in the knowledge of the disease. So creating a decision support tool that isn't proven to work on your patient population I just didn't think I would have a lot of value in it. And we started thinking about which technologies we could employ in order to bring this into kind of like the hands of as many clinicians as possible. And the idea of doing federated learning seemed to be very attractive because we both wanted to get everybody involved and to contribute to the model. And we also wanted everybody to have a validated version of the model that's validated on their data. And so we signed up around 20 institutions worldwide. And lo and behold, we discovered that can actually be done like really quick. Because if you alleviate the whole issue of sharing data and just get people to, sign up for specific use of the data, it's actually much easier to build these kind of collaborations. And so we did that together with our partners at NVIDIA and many hospitals and institutions around the world. And we got an algorithm that performed much better than any local algorithm we had trained on that network. And we compared that. And so we thought, wow, this is like a really great and, transformative idea. However, it was clear that this wasn't a sustainable way of doing that. We did a lot of kind of ad hoc things, sending scripts around, asking people to start up servers, provisioning stuff and whatnot. And we had a good support team to do that, but we wanted to turn this into a kind of a platform as a service. And so I asked NVIDIA, do you guys want to do that? And they said, well, we'd rather continue doing what we're already good at and building the SDKs and building the hardware and all the kind of like, building blocks in order to construct something like that. And I ended up deciding to dedicate myself to that. I teamed up with Yuval Bar-Or, who a dude I knew from since I was in, I think, middle school or high school, but we never actually worked together. And we were both in kind of a time where we wanted to start something new. He got also excited about this prospect. And it was kind of nice because he's a dude who's never worked in healthcare. And I've never worked in big tech. And so each one of us brought their own way of looking at the world and their own perspectives. For example, one of the things that surprised Yuval was that the sizes of training data sets that we used. He said, in Google and Amazon and etc., we use billions of data. You guys are using thousands. And he said, yeah, that's one of the reasons is that data is so siloed in healthcare. So we went out, raised our seed round at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and launched the company.
And those initial projects that you are currently working on, how did you go about creating the pipeline or negotiating with those organizations and getting actually them to work with you? A new, unknown, unproven company that's just building the product.
Yeah, so we had some, nice track record, both with the exam project as well as with our own personal experience. We're kind of people who get stuff done, and that helped out with that. Also, the connection to NVIDIA, who've been good partners of us, has been very helpful. Then ultimately, it was building an awesome team at Rhino and demonstrating value from our product. We had to build a lot of technology quickly. We had to harden that technology, and we had to listen to our customers. We started it out very grassroots. We didn't kind of go to big corporates and started from being an enterprise solution. We started from, I think we called it at that point, a collaborative data solution for researchers, which then investors told me is a terrible pitch. So we, also had to refine some of that. We really started from working out with hospital and university-based researchers. Our thinking was that these guys were always ahead of the curve and had kind of a more novel and more ambitious use cases. And we were pretty ambitious on our own and wanted to be on the forefront. And by the time we finished the year 2021, we had already really brought in very strong and differentiated capabilities, but also started piquing the interest of bigger organizations. It was also a good time in the sense that all the issues around GDPR and its implementation and privacy shield in America and is HIPAA sufficient and how should HIPAA evolve and how is patient data privacy and how are patient rights over the data in America. All these things have really reached an inflection point, and we can see that from the beginning of this year, there's been a huge amount of interest from bigger corporates in these kind of privacy-preserving technologies.
I think the timing makes perfect sense for the technologies to emerge, and it will unlock, as you said, it will remove that frustration or that even sometimes fear of doing something with your data because you fear being in breach of some of those regulations, and being able to actually leverage it without that concern is a huge boost for any organization and for the whole, I think, AI community. And in terms of your team, you mentioned that you managed to get those first customers thanks to your team that built the product fast. So what kind of people did you bring for the initial team that you built at Rhino? What kind of qualities did you look for in those people?
Every person who joins a real passion to help change healthcare using federated learning. It's kind of like the mission-driven part is one of the most important things to us. And we know that ultimately, we're a startup. Startup's life is very turbulent. We just closed another round of financing. Many companies didn't. Many companies had to make kind of like tough decisions. And if your heart isn't into it, it's really hard to enjoy and survive being part of an early stage startup team. And so I'd say that's a really important thing. The second thing is every person on our team are really passionate about making a change in general and are hard workers. And I'd say the third thing is being a team player. We're a team of people who, pick up the slack for each other and are willing to, help each other out. But I'd say some of like the most, mission-driven, dedicated, and team players. The fact that, folks are intelligent and capable and all that, we kind of like, that's, the baseline requirement, but the three things I said is how we differentiate different candidates.
Yeah, those are table stakes. And in terms of passion, I wonder, how do you check for this quality? I mean, people can be passionate at this point in time and lose passion if it's not really deep sitting within them. How do you test or assess the person's passion?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I usually find it, first of all, when people interview with multiple stakeholders, they tend to reveal their true colors. And it's easy to usually know who's really, in it and interested in it and who's just interviewing for a job. Second of all, I'm very upfront about, the challenges of joining a startup and, what it is required to be successful in the role. And I think people typically react to that. And like, if it makes them more excited, then it makes them more excited. And if it scares them, it scares them. But we never try to, paint like an unrealistic picture. We also have a lot of people who have already been in startups, including early stage, so that they know it and they know what to expect. And by the fact that they're interviewing means that they know, how it is to work in an early stage startup. And lastly, I think that people's CV typically reflects kind of who they are. Not always, but you can typically see based on the kind of challenges people have taken, If people pursued different roles, have moved, have immigrated, have, taken up stuff that they were very passionate about, even if it didn't have necessarily financial return, or have been, taking big risks in order to meet their dreams, you typically see that.
Did you develop any unique approach to interviewing people for the job? You mentioned multiple interviewers, which makes sense to then kind of look from different perspective on the person. But your personal approach to interviews, is there anything unique that you developed over the years of interviewing people?
I don't know if it's an approach. It's like, I think I typically have a good understanding of who I'm speaking with pretty early on. And I also rely on some trusted advisors, including board observers, directors, and advisors, in order to also add another kind of layer of experience to that. I'd say that it kind of depends on the seniority of the hire. But like if I'd be hiring somebody to the management team, I'd typically be asking people on what's their vision and how we're planning to bring that vision into the team, and kind of like, pretty concrete steps. Meaning not just like, be an awesome person who's smart, but also how do you take your ideas and approach and implement them in short order. It's not, you don't always have to be right, but you have to have a hypothesis.
That makes sense. You should have a hypothesis and be able to drive toward it, and then, of course, adjust depending on your results. Speaking about you personally, how did becoming the CEO, the founder of the company, change you over the last few years?
My son was also born a few months before I started the company. So it was a lot of changes in life at the same time. And so it's a bit hard to disentangle everything. But I think I've become more responsible, in some ways more compassionate things. And also it strengthened the understanding that everything you do is part of a marathon, not a sprint. And you need to be able to look at the long picture and plan other people's resources, and also plan your own resources in accordance to that.
Yeah, you cannot run a startup as a sprint. That would be that you may start initially, and then you either burn out completely and you just quit, or you realize that it's not a sprint and that it will be a marathon with lots of ups and downs, and each ups and down will be felt quite deeply by yourself, and you need to figure out how to manage it. So as a kid and the company at the same time, that's a tough combination. Did you have some sort of a conversation about that with your wife? What was her reaction to this?
We had surprisingly not considered a lot of these things a priori. So when everything kind of like came in together, it was actually kind of a revelation. My Anna also works in a fairly like high burn environment. She works in a venture capital fund. So for both of us, it was kind of being on top of your game, and both of us had to make some concessions in order to keep it together.
What would be your advice to entrepreneurs starting new companies right now, starting new companies, applying AI?
AI is no longer just a buzzword, and you can't just call yourself something AI or AI something. You need to really show some sort of business value to the world. I would say that in AI, building a tech platform is often not that complicated. I think in our case, it actually was a bit, because we focus on platform as a service and not, in using an existing platform. But whatever you do, most of the effort is getting users to use what you build. And I think that given the current market backdrop, it's very cautious to like you need to be cautious, not spend too much money in the beginning, acquire customers early, and acquire real customers who really have a burning problem to solve with your solution is super important. I'd also say one of the biggest hurdles for monetizing AI solutions is proving value. And that's often not at all trivial to show. Like it's like the kind of, I've detected a certain number of broken bones is not necessarily enough. You need to show how you help doctors do their job, and that delivers operational quality or outcome advantage to the hospital, or some sort of a financial advantage. Like without that, it's really hard to scale a company. And I'd say the last is you work in an area that's fairly saturated in some ways, and pick your targets in a clever way. There have been a lot of radiology AI startups. There still are new radiology AI startups coming to light, and I think there's still room for more, but it's definitely not as much of a greenfield as it was a few years ago. I see more and more pathology AI. I see more and more multimodal, genetic driven, etc. So there's definitely kind of like new fields to venture into. Sometimes AI is only kind of like the cherry on top, and you need to have a product that solves problems which are not related to AI, and then use AI in order to make your workflow much more efficient. And some of the best companies that I think have made the most progress in the field are companies that, while they have AI in their name, the core product is a software product that offers all sorts of different types of usabilities and also uses AI rather than AI being the center of that. I don't think a company's core offering as a diagnostic algorithm by itself is today as easy to scale and grow as it was.
The trick is to build a system that is useful. That was not possible before because of that missing AI piece. And now you have the missing AI piece. It may be not the core of the system, but it enables the whole system that you couldn't do earlier.
Indeed. The capability that we provide in driving collaboration early can help new companies go to market much faster and not only, show results in one center, but already show results in multiple centers and take a lot of the burden off platform building, data sharing, data collaborations, and kind of like a lot of things that today take a lot of in early stage startups, CEO and different, parts of the management team's time and energy, and helps them really focus on building a good product.
Yeah, this is a very good point. This may be one of those things that will enable a new generation of companies to be built easier than it used to be.
And also helps hospitals collaborate with multiple companies, because today it's not like, I have a collaboration with a company X, so I'll kind of like, go out of my way and help them out and install and integrate their software. It's rather I'm working with 30 companies who each and every one of them has different software, different integrations, different whatever. And we can provide them with a hub to do all of these things without requiring them to integrate all of these tools one by one and potentially compromise their security posture.
So this is your goal. This is your vision for the Rhino Health in the future?
I think there's a lot of visions for the company. I think our ability to help data collaborations and bringing compute to the edge can serve a lot of these. I think that accelerating innovation is a big part, and I also think that translating existing innovation into additional hospitals and clinical settings is another one. My dream is to see Rhino as one API to connect to all data sources, get data insights, deliver these insights back to physicians and researchers without having to move data at all.
That's an exciting future to look forward to. Okay, so how can listeners learn more about Rhino Health, where they can follow you on social media?
So we have a Rhino Health LinkedIn account that's very active. We have a rhinohealth.com website with a lot of updates. And I'm happy for people to just, reach out to the team and myself directly on different social media.
Sounds good. I will add those links to the notes. Ittai, thank you for joining me today. It was great talking to you.
Thank you very much, Artem. It was my pleasure.